to try and establish a nationalist or racist or religious claim. In other words, here is this box of remains that says the Jesus family on it. And so that was actually, I think the New York Times almost fell for that story about a year or so ago. This shows that King David was a real person, which means we can build a settlement somewhere else, etc. So there's a sort of triple layer of corruption attached to it. It also shows how gullible people are. But I suppose we knew that.
Yeah, no, I think it's sort of something I became aware of as I was traveling through the ancient world, was how much collecting, excavating, and displaying artifacts is so closely tied to the national narrative, whatever that's meant to be. And it made me wonder how much gets ignored in the excavation process as not serving kind of the national myth, whatever the national myth might be. And I don't know the answer to that question, but it did occur to me as I was reading about the Hittites and the Hittite pact between the Hittites and the Egyptians, and how the Israelite nation also had an alliance there. And I just thought, gee, I never saw that reflected in any of the museums that I've seen in Egypt or in Israel for that matter. And I thought, well, probably it's not very convenient for the national narrative of each of those countries today. So that's something else to kind of think about.
Always bearing in mind also that every artifact in the Kabul National Museum, Afghan National Museum, in the same week as the demolition of the Bamiyan Buddhas, was destroyed on purpose because it didn't fit with the Islamic concept of what a national patrimony would be. This stuff was by definition profane because it didn't reflect the Prophet.
But thankfully they were saved.
That's another reason why I think one always has to qualify this idea of, are we dealing with Assyrians or not, or just people who live where Assyria used to be?
I think it's a good time to go to some questions. And the key thing is to go to the mic, because otherwise you won't be heard or recorded. So I think we'll set up the mics there. And if you could just come up, and as always, keep the questions brief and in the form of a question. It would be very appreciated. And if maybe we could, we took off the slide. Good. Okay. Since you got there first, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like your panel to answer or comment on the looting that was done in Baghdad when the American troops entered.
Anybody want to?
I was actually in Baghdad I used to work at the Washington Post shortly after the Baghdad Museum was looted, and it's been very hard to get the story straight, because the story that was put out at the time was the 120,000 pieces were stolen, and that was the entirety of the Baghdad collection. Matthew Bogdanos, the American colonel who was sent then to kind of set things right, has done a very good job of explaining what actually happened. There are, to my knowledge, still about 4,000 to 5,000 pieces that have not been returned. In fact, so it was a much smaller number, still a horrible number, a couple, 20,000, something like that, pieces. Many of the most valuable pieces were thought stolen. It turns out were actually saved by the museum staff and hidden in a bank vault. As, by the way, as was also the case in Kabul, I just visited this beautiful exhibit of the Bactrian Horde that was saved by these heroic museum staff in Kabul. Also, they put it at the risk of their own lives under the Taliban in an Afghan bank. But in any event, the main problem, so there are still about 4,000 to 5,000 pieces that are missing, some of them very valuable and singular pieces of that museum, to my knowledge. But the bigger problem, I spoke recently about the book in Washington, and the Iraqi ambassador came to that talk, and he said, he confirmed to me what I've heard also from archaeologists and such, which is that the looting going on in Baghdad, in Iraq generally, is not having to do with the museum, but is extremely destructive and rampant and uncontrolled right now.
I have two questions on a related topic, deterrence. First, you mentioned obliquely about punishments and making looting a crime. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little more, and do we need to raise the stakes to deter looting with punishment? And secondly, are there any mechanisms that exist to reward looting? That is to say, give rewards to would-be looters to keep treasure or archaeological finds in situ? Thanks.
So this would be like giving poppy farmers something else to grow, that kind of thing?
Well, there's an awful lot of money out there from museums and philanthropic organizations to preserve archaeological finds. So I don't know if there's any mechanisms out there that exist like that.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's an important part of what we were talking about earlier as a part of the solution to the problem is to create alternative economies, because this is a real economy in certain situations. So obviously there are means of doing that. It's on a scale and it involves the investment of governmental resources, not museum resources, but the scale is so great it would be on governmental or non-governmental organization resources. But certainly that's part of it. To the question of upping the sort of penalties on looting as a disincentive, it generally is, and it probably is always everywhere, against the law to loot. It's certainly against the law to remove, in some cases against the law to own privately, in some cases against the law to export. But there, even in places where the penalties are the greatest, punishable by death in China, for example, there's still looting going on. People still take risks when they think there's a benefit to them to take that risk. I mean, people commit all kinds of crimes in this country because they think they won't get caught, whatever the penalty might be. So I don't know that penalty by itself is sufficient. I think it's an integrated regime of carrots and sticks that's going to make it work.
The other thing is that there's no uniformity of penalties, so and it's wielded often for political reasons, as Jim has pointed out, as in the case of Marion True. You have some very ambitious prosecutors who've taken laws that have been on the books in Italy that had not been enforced pretty much forever, and have wielded that, very aggressively against, for example, Marion True. But what is also the case is that there's just a patchwork everywhere, and there's no international law. There's no kind of consistency for people to either, adjudicate disputes or to know what the penalties might be overall. So it makes it hard because, for example, you now have Egypt trying to pass a law that would allow it to prosecute people the same way that Italy has been, and that Greece has kind of done pretty sort of half-heartedly. So you don't want to be tried in the Egyptian judicial system, I promise you.
On this side?
Yes. Over the Christmas holidays, I went to Cambridge, the Fitzwilliam Museum, to see an extraordinary gold jewelry which had been excavated in an area called Vani, which is now in the state of Georgia. It was an amazing, extraordinary exhibit. Anyway, they said that at the end of it's going to go to Greece and then it's going to go to Los Angeles, but after that it's going back to Vani. Did those people have a place where it can be kept safe and share it with the rest of the world? I mean, do they have a good system for antiquities there?
In Georgia? I've never been to Georgia. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I hope so. So there's so many incredible treasures in the area of the former Soviet Union. Some of it dates from the colonial period when they took things for their own national museums themselves. Some of it dates from World War II and has to do with the stuff that Hitler spent a lot of his time gathering up, or that the very angry Soviet troops sort of took in triumph back, to the motherland, and that Germany wants back from Russia. So you have all kinds of restitution battles between Germany and Russia today that has to do with objects that originated in neither country. So, but I don't know about the Georgia Museum.
Without knowing about that part of the Caucasus, it sounds as if they've got one idea very clear, which is it's nice to share and send things on the circuit. And if they don't have such a system now, well, we've got to assume that they are as capable as anyone else of developing one. And clearly they respect their patrimony. So I think the answer is provisionally yes. It looks as if they are on the right track.
I mean,
anyway, there's no way of they won't get one unless they're allowed to handle it themselves.